Good evening. Welcome to Injustice Investigations. I am your host, Al Scott. Dana Hudson, as always, welcome to our live broadcast. And thank you so much for tuning in this evening. I hope and trust that everybody has had a blessed day thus far. Their minds have been blessed, but extremely busy. Extremely busy. Our guest tonight, I didn't get an opportunity to speak to her again over the phone concerning his son's case, but uh, I think we're gonna be okay tonight. I still think we're going to be okay tonight. Tonight we are going into part two of what happened to Brandon Embry. As you know from our last broadcast, he was found clinging to life inside of his apartment in North Carolina, and the young man's death is very, very suspicious. Tonight, I believe we're going to speak about the person of interest tonight, if I'm correct. Okay, she said yes, she's going to speak about that young lady tonight. And incidentally, again, let me get this out of the way real quick. Sarah's coming back home again tomorrow night. When we said we were going to give her all the airtime she needed, we meant that. We were going to do that because there's an individual in my heart that I know needs to be locked up, without a doubt. Tanya Fine, hello, you big time. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Faith, good evening to you as well. The one and only is in the house. I'm always honored when she shows up. Melissa, love you big time. As always, appreciate you giving me support. Okay, we're doing two shows tonight. So this show is probably going to end at about maybe, we said 6:55. We would end it so we get ready for
Well,
the 7 o'clock show. But we may end it a few minutes earlier to get ready for us tonight. So we may. But this is the first time we've done this. We have two shows back to back tonight, and we have two shows back to
mm,
back tomorrow night. Tonight, after this show, I think we're discussing, I think, police reform. I think that's what we're talking about tonight on our next show. And I know we're back to back again tomorrow night. We're speaking on the police again in this country.
hello.
On one of these shows, uh, can you hear me, Sarah? I don't think Sarah can hear me. Can anybody out there hear me talking still? I just need one somebody to say, okay, I think they can. Melissa just spoke. Sarah, are you still with me? Okay, Sarah has left the building. She reminds me of Elvis. She just left the building. That's why. Just left the building. Okay, thank you, Sonia Fine. The only woman in Shreveport I know who had her last name. Well, let's do with that. Okay, hopefully Sarah will join us back again. There's some technical issues going on that side. I hope it's not on this side. Hey, Sarah.
Okay. Hey,
Sarah still
sorry,
might
I
be.
think my
Okay.
Wi-Fi went out. It does that periodically, and I can hear the wind out there.
Oh, that's probably, but that's okay. That's just life. There's some things that, uh, as much as we would like to, we just can't control. You know.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we're going to be speaking about how much convicted police officers, how much money that they're worth, how much money that they receive when they have been convicted of a felony. That number will surprise you. Incidentally, Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, went into the courtroom, lied, said he's out of money. He's out of money. He can't hire a good defense team. Well, somewhere some money came up because he has hired a high profile criminal attorney to get him out of doing any more time for the murder of George Floyd. Of course, we'll speak about him tonight and tomorrow night. Okay, without further ado, uh, Sarah, I want to welcome you back to the show tonight.
Thank you. I hope the internet stays connected. Can you hear me?
You are not the only one. I'm praying it does myself. Can you hear me clear?
Yes.
Okay, okay. On this end, you're froze, and I keep, so there's a slight
Oh,
delay.
okay. Let
Okay, but
me
hopefully,
let me
okay,
try to switch to um
okay,
the other internet portion. Hang on just a second and I'll see if that
yes,
helps,
ma'am.
okay? All right. Hang
Okay,
on.
all right. Take your time.
Okay, settings.
Let me just we'll talk about this later tonight. So let me bring up something. Something that's very simple. Uh,
Okay. Let's see if this okay.
Sarah.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, you're moving now.
I'm moving. Yay. Okay.
Amen. All right. Okay. Quickly. In Huntsville, Alabama, a black woman had been missing for about 12 days, and when she was found, it was by accident. She was found by a police officer. She was found because she was inside of a van, a prison van transporting inmates uh, that hadn't been used since I think March of this year. He noticed it when he saw some shoes outside of the van, and upon uh, closer inspection, he found uh, the dead body of a 29-year-old female. Her name is Christina Nance. On October the 7th, they found her inside of a van at Huntsville Public Safety Complex inside of a police station. Now, how she died? No. How she got there? Don't know. Benjamin Trump is now the family's attorney. We do know this is that when they showed the public the video was of poor quality. Now, and it happens a lot when you have surveillance video. You don't update your equipment. But here's what I don't think should happen. Incidents like this at a police station, at a prison, this should never happen. You should always have the best top technology that money can buy. You are the police. That makes no earthly sense. That that video was, I mean, it was just terrible. If any of you saw it, it was terrible.
Mm.
So there's no excuse for why they have surveillance video that's not useless to them. Of course, right now they're saying no foul play is suspected, but we don't know. So we'll talk about that later tonight. Sarah, I know you've been on a lot of talk shows, right?
A few.
And um, has that changed the course of this case? Has it made uh, the police dig harder to find out what really happened to your son, or has everything remained somewhat the same?
I would say it's either remained the same or that much more of a cover up at this point. With people asking questions, with more information coming out, there hasn't been any inclination for them to reopen the case. The more people that I speak to um, and bring up all of these points about how suspicious everything is, and I mean, I'll say suspicious, but it's obvious that this was a homicide. And there's really no doubt about it at this point. And I just feel like that with them not opening the case, they are really engaging in a cover up.
Okay. Again, as we said the first night you came on the show, I tip my hat to your son. He is a Navy veteran, and we appreciate his love and his courage for this country, that he would stand up for this country. Okay. Briefly, if you can, for those who don't know what we're talking about, Brandon Embry, if you would briefly tell us about your son and tell us, what happened and what made you somewhat suspicious. And you said you would go over to his apartment. I think it was you and your daughter, correct?
Yes. Yes, my daughter
Okay.
and I had heard from my son. We got a few strange texts. We went over to his apartment. He didn't respond. I'm just going to give the abbreviated version tonight, but I ended up calling 911 that we do not go in. The first responders went in and brought Brandon out. He was in a sheet all the way up to his neck, so we really didn't see all of his injuries. He was at the hospital a couple of hours before we went in to see him, and they were telling us that the prognosis was really bad. They end up transferring him to a higher level of care. He survived about 29 hours from the time he was found until the time he died. He was on 3 forms of life support. Um, they tried to do dialysis, but when they would turn the machine on, he would his blood pressure would just be just at the point of death, and they had to immediately take him off the dialysis. Um, he passed away, and it was just there was a lot of confusion. I was in a state of grief. I knew something wasn't right, but I would say at that point, I'm depending on law enforcement to do their job, because I wasn't looking at my son just passing away, even though I was just mortified and mystified by all of these injuries that I could see. Then come to find out, I was only seeing a portion. It ended up he was bruised all over his body. He was injured all over his body. And I would say, more than half of these injuries I couldn't see between blankets, medical equipment, the fact that a lot of the bruising was on his backside. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't looking at my son, who just passed away in that hospital bed, as a case that I needed to solve. And no parent would. I mean, I knew something wasn't right. I kept asking medical staff, what do you think happened? Because I couldn't understand. As far as I know, he had been in his apartment alone. But
Mm-hmm.
the police knew better, because before my son had even passed away, the police were in his apartment conducting search warrants, and they were pulling up women's clothing. And the detective was holding up a bra. There was women's clothing. They didn't collect any of the clothing. There was hair. Later, in the crime scene photos, you can see that the hair all over the clothing. Um, they they opened the door with the key that belonged to the property management, and there was this female contacted us, the person of interest in his case contacted the
Mm-hmm.
family, and I immediately contacted the police, but she waited a while before she contacted me back. So she contacted my daughter-in-law. I contacted her, then I didn't hear anything back from her for several days, and I found out she had actually left the state. And so then I finally start talking to her. I contact the police. I'm thinking, this man just died. They need to be pulling her in that day and ask
Mm-hmm.
questions. And, I was like, should I call the police? And the family said, yeah, call. But they didn't call her in. They waited to get a search warrant on my son's phone. And then they found out that this female that had contacted the family and another female had been in heavy communication with my son. Um, they just knew things that they didn't share, and they weren't
Mm-hmm.
transparent. They weren't telling a whole lot. And you hear that in many cases, that they keep the details about the case to themselves, so that when people have guilty knowledge about certain things, then they would know that person had to be there. But there was a lot that they did not express to us. And to me, looking back now, I think the things that they weren't expressing were also a way for them to cover up his case. And I'm looking at this, some of this is very obvious. And I'm thinking, if they're doing this with my son's case, then how many other cases have they handled the same way? And one of the things that was in the search warrant was the fact that they wanted to find his house key. They took crime scene photos. They put in the search warrant that if they could find the apartment key, that it may have the DNA of the person who locked the door. And they were thinking the keys were in his truck. So they did the search warrant for his truck. And the keys ended up not being in there. His wallet and keys were actually in his apartment. And then if you look at the crime scene photos, the wallet has an open thumb slide, so you can take your thumb and slide like an ID or a card out of the wallet. And if you look at that crime scene photo, there is blood around the opening for the thumb slide. And to me, that shows someone was in his wallet with bloody hands taking out something out of his wallet. And then, as I said before, there ended up being a bloody Visa card under the passenger seat. They put in the search warrant, they were looking for the key, and, I couldn't understand why they really just didn't thoroughly investigate this female. And I thought, well, she's talking. I'm going to keep talking to her. I'm going to keep getting details. And I kept asking her different things about the keys. She told me things like he would leave a key for her. She said that she knew where the spare key was kept, which she called it a bureau, which is the dresser. She said the key was kept in the dresser. She said that she would ask him to leave the door unlocked for her. But I found lots of things that she said about the key. And I believe when the police interviewed her, then she made it sound like she didn't say these things, but I actually have the messages that she sent. The police never found his door key. So that's a huge indicator. How could he have even got inside his apartment without his key? Because it's just a place that people would not leave their door unlocked. His sister verified that he was always locking the door. He did not go and leave his door unlocked. So the key was never found, and the police never told me that. And I go back and I start looking through things, and I realize, okay, there's no key in evidence. There was no key in the crime scene photos. And I never found a key. My husband never found a key. So someone locked that door and took the key with them. And even in the crime scene photo, you can see a swipe of blood on the deadbolt that would be where someone locked the door and turned the key in the deadbolt.
Okay, let me ask you this. The key. And the apartment was locked when you all arrived, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if it's locked and your son is on the inside, he would have to have locked it, right?
Either he could lock it from the inside or someone with a key locked it. But
from the outside,
no key was found. So that points to someone had his key and locked the door from the outside.
Exactly, because if he locked it himself, then the key has to be in there.
Right.
Right.
And it wasn't.
Okay. Let me ask you. Right. Let me ask you about the person of interest. You said that person left town, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Was this a planned trip, or it just spontaneous?
No, I think it was just after my son, and then I've also spoke of Edith, who her nickname was Dee Dee. So right after both of them died, she left, and she supposedly went home, but no one really knows because she gets a plane ticket and she could really be anywhere. She could have really flown anywhere. So I believe she
Okay,
flew out of
so
Charlotte.
okay. Incidentally, what's the name of the police department that's in question right now?
Asheboro Police Department is the one that investigated my son's death investigation.
So I'm assuming that your son and that person, they have been in some kind of intimate relationship, whether it was serious or not.
Yes, she made it out that it was very serious, that they were planning to move in together, planning to get married. She tells me they were going to open a bank account together, and I don't believe that. My son never mentioned her to me. He did months
Whoa.
before he went to the hospital, that first time, when he mysteriously ended up in the ICU. He mentioned that he was dating a girl to his sister. And he said she's going back to Russia, so he doesn't think it's going to work out. And it ended up she's not from Russia. She wasn't going back to Russia. This was just something that she told him.
Okay, so if what she said to you and others that this was a serious relationship and even marriage was on the table, right? Okay, this is me. If it's a serious relationship and we were planning to get married and this happened, well, obviously I'm hurt. I'm tore up. Obviously, I'm not going to jump up and leave and go anywhere because I want to find out what happened to my fiance.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But she didn't do that.
Her messages and text are extremely strange. So, like I said, I guess you could say I was like investigating her myself. I kept in contact with her. We met up in November, I want to say November, at the local bookstore. And I told her that my daughter would let me read text messages from my son, just so I could see his last communications. And I asked her if I could see her phone. She told me not to swipe up. But I look at this, I start reading these messages, and I thought, oh, no, this is very off. And so I pulled out my phone and I took a photo of her phone. And I was hoping she wouldn't freak out, but I thought if I have to fight her down right here in Chick-fil-A, I'm taking a photo of these messages. And they were very strange. She would say, like, are you in jail? Are you in the hospital? Are you in a life-altering situation? This might not be verbatim, but this is the gist of
Mm-hmm.
what she was saying. And I'm like, why would you ask someone if they're in a life-altering state? So that was very, very odd to me. And the way I read the messages was almost like she was writing them to someone else, not really to Brandon, but she was writing them as proof
Mm-hmm.
of, so I want you to see that I checked on him, kind of thing.
Okay, so we do know that somewhere in the investigation, if we would dare call it that, she became a person of interest, right?
Yes. And really, she should
Okay,
have been a person of interest long before she was ever questioned.
so when she was named as a person of interest, did the detectives give you a reason why they were now looking at her as a person of interest? And
Um,
incidentally, it doesn't mean that that person.
They
Go ahead.
really didn't. It was really me um pushing the police department because I had her recorded with guilty knowledge of the crime scene, things that she absolutely could not have known, things that I didn't know until later, like 9 months later, when I get the crime scene photos. Then I go back to the conversations and I'm like, she couldn't have known this unless she had been there. And I sent those
Right.
recordings to the detective, and they should have known. They saw the crime scene. They saw the crime scene, when basically when those photos were taken. So they should have known that the things that she was talking about with the bathroom being destroyed, that Brandon was found naked on a sheet by the closet. She said that that came to her in a dream, and she couldn't have known that unless she had been there. And now I go back, she even talked about all of the food, everything that was present in the crime scene.
Okay. Was there at some point in time, maybe not the same day, I don't know, but did someone order a pizza?
Yes, she talked about the pizza. And another thing about that pizza, so I was looking back at his bank records and I saw a couple of orders to Domino's. There was an order for $13 and something, $14. But that night, he had ordered, his order was like $36, like close, just a few dollars shy of $40. And I thought that's a lot for one person. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
perhaps those females were there with him.
Uh, so I know I asked you this last week, but I'm going to ask you again. Uh, if you had to rate the police and their investigation into this case, A, B, C, which one would you give them?
Oh, they failure, failure. This needs a do-over, and not by that police department. It really needs to be turned over to another agency at this point.
But I think they also, in so many ways, were con- contaminating the crime scene.
Yes.
Okay, there was no professionalism. There was a female officer that stood on what you consider to be evidence.
Yes, there was a large imprint of his head, and the thing about that is that there was spray coming out of the back of his head, and the police report stated that he was bleeding from his head. And she had taken a box, a cardboard box that had been in Brandon's apartment, and placed it over that blood print and stood on it. And to me, that could totally destroy the blood spatter, the blood pattern. And what if they needed to come back and take more photos? I just thought that that was something that a child would know better not to do. I just couldn't
Exactly.
understand how someone who had had any training working as a detective, she's a seasoned detective. She's not new. She's been on the force
Exactly.
for a while, because she told me of a previous case that she had worked on for 6 years. So I'm not exactly sure how long she had been there, but it's been a while. She should know better.
And I don't think, I mean, I guess depending upon what she said, that uh, whatever case she previously worked on, I don't think that should have been of interest to you for her to say that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe
it
there
was
was
kind
some,
of strange when she brought it up. I thought it was kind of strange. She was in the meeting, she was talking about how she fought to keep a case open, and the information that I got was there was a private investigator that was helping the family, and he's the one that pushed to keep the case open. And just how she said to keep the case open, I just go back to how many cases have been closed and swept under the rug.
So I think it's really the police department that we can.
I'm froze up on this end. Can you hear me?
Okay.
There you are.
No, okay. Just right now. So,
Yeah, there.
okay, go ahead.
Yes.
You're still not coming in.
I'll check my, let me check. Settings. I'm here.
Sarah? Okay, you
Yes,
can hear
I'm
me?
here. Yes, I can hear
Okay.
you.
Okay, go. Okay. You brought up the issue about the search warrant.
Hmm.
Okay. If you will, can we go into that now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. Tell me about the search
Um, with the search warrant, the male detective who was the lead detective, he had put in the search warrant that, and this was issued before he had died. But at this point, which I have in front of me, that he states that they had taken handcuffs into evidence, which is consistent with the wounds that were on his wrist, because his wrists did look like they were torn, like he was trying to possibly get out of some restraint. Um, the detective told me that he had knots all over his head, and it stated that there were rod-shaped bruises. So they were looking for some type of rod-shaped weapon, such as a bat or something to that effect that could have been used to put those bruises on him. It listed it right here. It talks about defensive wounds on his right palm,
warrant. Okay.
contusions to his head, with one large contusion to the right side above his ear, which I mentioned, that is what is called a battle sign, and that is actually a symptom of skull fracture. So the bruising around his eyes and the bruising behind his ear, those are all signs of skull fracture. He was hypothermic. His pupils were fixed and dilated, organs shutting down. He put that there was suspected drug paraphernalia, and they didn't specify, but there's two things on that. And one was that my son was on prescription testosterone. He was actually on HCG, which was a precursor to testosterone. And in the crime scene photos, you can see the detective holding up a Ziploc bag with the syringes and the prescription information and the doctor's name on the bag. You can also see the vial of medication in the bathroom, and they moved the vial from one photo to another photo, so they knew that there was a vial. And vials, of course, are usually used with syringes when it's medication. And so they were, putting it like these syringes were drug paraphernalia, I suppose. The other thing was, like I said, they took a scale and a cup. My son was a chemist. He measured food. There is no telling what the scale and cup, but he was not on any drugs. He had several drug tests for work, and he wasn't on any drugs. But it does state that they are looking for weapons such as knives or blunt objects that was used to make the contusion located on his back, head, and upper arm. And the bruising on his arms were like on his he was left-handed, so left dominant arm, and the bruising was inside the arm. So of course that's like, if you're blocking someone, you would get possibly struck, and he just was bruised all over. And then again, it mentions that it states right here, Mr. Embry was found in a position that he could not have locked the door, leading detectives to believe that the door was locked by another person. I mean, they state that they believe that someone locked that door. And it's like they just decided to close the case and put a spin on it. And
So, and just to create a team, Sarah likes to play hide and seek.
a second, there we go.
So,
sorry about that.
Okay. No, you're fine. Okay, now I've seen the picture.
Mm-hmm.
What's the explanation for the defense performance, and most importantly for me, the blackened eye?
So no explanations were given. I asked the medical staff and they said, well, there's no way that he could have put these injuries on himself. And they said that it actually looked like maybe he had been in a car accident, hit by a car, not an accident, but he looked like he had been hit by a car. The police really didn't try to explain his injuries, and then they started saying, when they got to where they were going to close the case, they were saying that he put these injuries on himself, that the medical examiner decided that he died from pneumonia, and that the pneumonia made him crazy and lose oxygen to his brain due to having pneumonia, and hit himself all over himself. So as we've been in the state of COVID and had, an extreme number of cases, think about how many people beat themselves all over. And, as someone said, Brandon would have to be some sort of contortionist to put the bruises on his body and, on places that they were. And to be honest, a human body could not sustain that type of injury and stay conscious. Like, I think they would pass out from the pain, that he could not do that to himself.
And I think it would be, maybe it's happened, I don't know, but I think it would be extremely difficult for you to give yourself a black eye.
Yeah, right. And if, to me, he had so many bruises of skull fracture. So if he had skull fracture, how could he do all of that? And it just bruises in places he absolutely could not reach. It's you can Google people that have beaten themselves actually to death, and there are zero legitimate cases. And I asked the medical examiner, and she tried to say that she's seen lots of cases of this, and they don't exist.
Okay, what was her explanation for the gums of the lip?
There wasn't any. I you know, I don't know if how many parents actually have to pull up autopsy photos and see autopsy photos. I had a private investigator that tried to, um, look at them for me so that I wouldn't have to, because it is something that once you see them, you can never unsee them. But the odd thing is that with Brandon's autopsy, because there's a lot of really visually graphic things in autopsy photos of the scalp being pulled back, of the rib cage being opened, things like that. But there were no photos like that in Brandon's autopsy photos. And I'm like, he has all of these indications of skull fracture. The police report says he's bleeding from his head. The hospital photo shows blood dripping onto the bed from the back of his head. And she tells me that she didn't take photos because there was no skull fracture. But then I'm like, but how do you know there's no skull fracture if you didn't check? So you have to check and pull the scalp back.
So this is the same medical examiner that basically wrote up her report, not on what she saw, what she really did, it's what the police was telling her.
Yes, I think the case ended up being turned over to Detective Johnson, the female detective, and she was the one that originally tried to say that Brandon was doing meth and he was crazy on meth, washing his own blood off of the walls, which was ridiculous. I told her he was not on meth, but she was present at the autopsy. And I think that she planted that seed or gave that indication to the forensic pathologist that she was looking for some kind of drug-induced psychotic scene, and that's where the bruises came from. So I don't think that it was ever looked at objectively.
Okay, so with the toxicology report, tell me exactly what drugs were found in this man's system.
There were no drugs found in his system. The only thing found in his system was diphenhydramine, which is the brand name is Benadryl.
Okay. Okay, we're just about out of time. What I'm going to do, we're going to bring you on, if you would like, at least once or twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
You have that. That's guaranteed. If you need more airtime, we don't have a problem with that as well. And what I'm going to do tonight and in the morning, I'm going to try to dig some more information on the person that's interested. After letting you know what we found, then I'm going to give you, I'm going to let you give me a yay or nay as to what you want to put out, because I think we all can agree, especially with our reliable sources on screen tonight, that something is wrong. He didn't die from pneumonia. Impossible. And I want to put the pressure out there on the police. I think the case needs to be reinvestigated for this time, as you said, with new detectives, with a fresh set of eyes and a new way of thinking, because with all that's going on and you all have made the half of this here, it's almost as if he is connected with somebody in that police department. And if that be true, then that is a scary thing. I think you said a little while ago, if we don't even worry about Brandon's case right now, realize this: if this is their practice in covering up for certain people, do you know how many people have gotten away with murder?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, we apologize for the technical difficulties that we had tonight.
Yeah,
We
I'm
cut this short
sorry.
tonight because no, that's right. No need to apologize. It happens on this end all the time, all the time. We have a show coming up right after this. It starts at 7. I have to go and get my notes together for that. And
Okay.
before we get out of here, if you, someone tonight would be so kind as to help keep us on air with donating some funds to the Cash App or the PayPal app, that would be just simply wonderful because we can we can uh, just do it for nothing. So we need your help to stay on air. Sarah, we're bringing you back tomorrow, and
Okay.
you and I will speak sometime in the morning. Uh,
Okay.
because as we said before we went on air, each night that we bring you back, we want to start from where we left off, but we want to
Okay.
get some new information out. And uh, one of the things that I really want to get out is as much information as we can. It's Cassandra Welch. Okay, that's the person of interest. And, her picture is still up on our Injustice Investigation Facebook page. I think it's also in the community section of our YouTube channel. If you like to go there and see who you're looking like, and I mean what she looks like. And incidentally, when you go there, I want you to keep this one thought in mind. But there's a lot of things that there's not saying can't say right now. I'm not saying can't say right now because as far as we're concerned, it's still an ongoing investigation. But there, to me, is enough evidence, maybe not to prove that she's a serial killer or a serial killer in the making, but I believe there's enough evidence there to open up this case again and to take a deeper look at who Cassandra really is.
Yes, I think so. There are two people that have been affected by Cassandra, and those are out publicly. That is my son and a previous boyfriend of hers. And then there is a third person known that we haven't talked about yet. We haven't put that out yet. But these are just cases that we feel strongly. But then there are other people that have had strange illnesses, similar illnesses that are also connected to her. So that number has really grown.
This is not only is it earthly sad, it's scary because as long as the monster in human form is on free ground, anyone that she comes in contact with is marked for death.
I know
Okay,
I
we're gonna get
definitely wouldn't I wouldn't want to go to
exactly.
Thanksgiving with her myself.
That's it. That's it. And we tried to make contact with her last week. We called her last known place of employment. She had been terminated. Uh, we called her cell. She would not answer. We tried to call her again. Realized that she had blocked me. So when you're doing strange things like that, I may not have all the evidence now to prove that she did it, but it just keeps adding up that there's a strong possibility that this is a serial killer.
Hmm.
And so we can't just close the case and discount her out because there's more than enough circumstantial evidence to bring her back in.
Yes. Yes,
And
and
that's what
by not investigating his case, they put people at danger, in danger, and for her to continue doing this. And from what I've researched, women that poison are often referred to as black widows. There are always multiple victims.
exactly. And the only ones that we know about is the ones that they got caught.
Exactly.
Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, Sarah, I'm going to talk to you in the morning. I know you're coming back home
Okay.
tomorrow night. And every word I just said to you is one of 2 times a week. We don't have a problem with bringing you back on because we're going to stay with you till you get the justice we all know that you deserve.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Tell your husband I say hello. Y'all enjoy your evening. Okay, people.
You
As
as well.
always,
Thank
I'm
you.
not always right. Thank you. And you're not always wrong. Just Lord willing, we'll see you in 5 minutes. Have a great